Hello everybody and welcome to your final seminar for the Popular Images module. Today we're going to be reviewing the skills that you've developed over this seminar series and some final tips for your assignment. I'll also provide a little feedback on the nude art responses in the form of two examples from responses to show you how these students have very well assessed the psychological interpretations of the nude images that they chose. So the first example of good psychological interpretations comes from a student who interpreted the image of Vivienne Westwood photographed by Jürgen Teller in 2013. Teller wanted the photograph to show people that they should be comfortable and open in their own skin. This is portrayed in the photograph as Vivienne is smiling slightly, and she is looking straight at the audience, which shows she is not cowering away or hiding her body in any way. In fact, Teller captures the look in her eyes as a seductive teenager, full of life and risk. The photograph was taken in Vivienne's own house on her couch, which also shows how comfortable she really was with Teller, and suggests that although nude photography is about pushing the limits and getting outside your comfort zone, it's also about the trust between the photographer and the model. I thought this response was particularly inspiring, as the student has examined the piece, taken psychological interpretations through the symbolism of the way that Vivienne's body is portrayed, the way that she is not cowering or hiding away, and that she's looking seductively at the audience. The student also explores the relationship between the model and the photographer, which in photography, of course, would be very important. So I thought that was a great example of looking at an image and responding to it psychologically. The other response that I wanted to share with you was a response by a student to the image The Venus of Urbino. Now this is a painting of a nude woman in her bedroom, and it was gifted by a duke to his wife. This student has examined the image, but has also examined. The other response that I wanted to share with you was a response to the image The Venus of Urbino. This is an image of a nude woman in her bedroom, and it was commissioned by a duke as a gift to his wife. This student has examined the image, but has also interpreted the psychological meaning of this image in the context of being a gift between a husband and wife, which I think was particularly inspiring. Looking at the face of the model, she is looking out to the observer. By looking at the observer, the subject directly engages with the observer. Being a gift to his wife, it can be inferred that this is a guide, a shining example of what the ideal wife should be. In a historical context, it's been said that dogs represent loyalty and faithfulness. The Duchess, being herself of high standing, would know this and recognise this symbolism, which would further cement the sentiment of remaining faithful in the bedroom. So this student has examined the image, identified that there is a sexual meaning behind the image of a woman directly engaging with the observer, directly engaging with the viewer, whilst nude in a sexual situation, and has interpreted that this might be a husband saying to his wife, "I love you, here is a gift. Remember that these are the wifely duties that I expect of you." And having a dog as part of the image, subtly in the corner, would be representative of loyalty and faithfulness. So what the husband is saying to his wife, as has been very well interpreted by the student, is, "I love you. Here is an image. This is what I expect of you as a wife. I expect you to be sexual and faithful." So that is a very interesting interpretation by one of your classmates. And I think that that's a great example of psychological interpretations from not only looking at the image, but also the history of the image. So very, very well done there. I will now do a quick overview of our seminars and what we covered in those seminars, what we discussed, and the key skills that I'm hoping that you gained throughout the module. So in the first seminar, we looked at Grayson Perry's tapestries. We discussed how understanding social class can be important in interpreting the meaning of art. If you remember, we looked quite deeply into the history of Grayson Perry, into his childhood, his influences, and his reasoning behind creating these tapestries. And this helped us to inform our understanding and psychological interpretation of his image. We considered the symbolism within the image as well. So this was our first practice of looking at symbolism. And one example that I'll remind you of, this came up in one of your seminars, was here we can see in the middle of the image, we can see a skull keyring attached to a car key. Now, we know that in the last tapestry of this series, that the character in this series died in a car crash. And so one student from this module identified that this could be a symbol of death and foreboding, which was a very, very good example of deriving psychological interpretations and meaning from symbolism within art. In our next seminar, we looked at interpretive dance. We discussed how understanding characters within an image can be important to the meaning of the piece. We also discussed the application of religion and sexuality in art, and how understanding political or emotional motives in artwork, in dance, but also in other forms of art, can help us to understand the psychological meaning behind the piece. We also considered how many different types of movement can be used to express different emotions and ideas within dance. And we looked at that in the context of an interpretive dance from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and also from a music video by Sia, the music video Chandelier. In Seminar 3, we looked at the Impressionist movement and we focused on the work of Monet. We discussed how understanding the history of an art movement can help us to understand the art in greater depth. For example, simply looking at this image might not tell you a massive amount about the history of the image, but if you look into the history of the image and apply that understanding to it, we were actually able to identify that the Impressionists were rebels in the art world. And so whilst we would look at this image and see it as being peaceful, at the time, in the context, this image would have been considered, or was considered by critics, to be childish and unrefined. And so understanding the history in which a piece of art was created tells us so much about the psychological meaning behind the piece of art. We also considered how methods and materials of a piece can help us to define it within an art movement. So we explored the things that define Impressionist paintings from Expressionist paintings, for example, being in particular the use of short brush strokes and not blending colours together. Next, we looked at album art and public scandal. If you remember, we explored the work of, we explored the album covers of Kanye West that he had commissioned. And I asked you to bring into the seminar some pieces of album art that you particularly liked. Quite a few of you did this, and we had, obviously I teach 4 seminars a week, and each seminar was so vastly different from the next because of the way that we explored your choices of album art as well. So that was a particularly interesting seminar. We discussed how musicians express themselves and their music, as well as political statements, through album arts commissioned through artists. So although the musical artists are unlikely to have created their album art, we did explore how artists have spoken with musicians and tried to create a piece of album art that demonstrates what that musician is trying to convey in that album. In particular, we looked at a few covers by Rihanna, who has got some quite political statements about the female body. As I said, we explored your favourite album covers, and some students explained their choices, and the class analysed this as a whole as well, so each seminar was very different. Next, we looked at the work of Brian Saunders in his self-portrait series under the influence of many different types of drugs. We used this as an example to discuss how understanding the mental state of an artist can shed light on the meaning of the image and the image creation. We also had a look at Brian Chambers, an artist who created self-portraits during different stages of psychosis when he had schizophrenia. We considered how artists convey their inner experiences with different methods, and how understanding the artist's experience can help us to interpret their artwork. Then, in relation to my Game of Thrones lecture, we looked at house sigils and words, and we discussed how families use colour and symbolism to portray important aspects of their family reputation. Now, this was, whilst heavily related to Game of Thrones, this was an exploration of how simple symbols can convey so much more than the image itself. For example, an image of a lion can mean pride, strength, power. It can symbolise godliness and being regal, being part of the monarchy. And so, whilst we use this applied to Game of Thrones and other family symbols, this helped us to use our analysis skills to interpret very simple images. We considered symbols that might represent us and our families, and some of us were able to identify how our surnames were associated with particular family crests. So that was quite an interesting seminar as well. In Seminar 7, we looked at The Scream by Edvard Munch and discussed the expressionist movement and how expressionists use different methods, such as colour and different brushstrokes, to portray inner emotional experiences. So this seminar was an important seminar for exploring colour and brushwork. In Seminar 8, we looked at posters displayed in World War II America and considered how audiences at in different time periods might have different experiences of an image. So not only is the context in which an image is created important, but also the context in which an image is received. We also considered using art to motivate the audience's behaviour. In Seminar 9, we looked at the work of Frida Kahlo, and we discussed how physical and emotional pain can be demonstrated through symbolism. We also considered theories that might inform our interpretation of the images. And finally, in Seminar 10, we looked at 3 examples of nude artwork, and we discussed how nudity has been received in different time periods and contexts. We also considered how different body positions can convey messages of vulnerability, sexuality, and lust. For example, students responding to this image explored how, although this is a romantic position, the presence or the sense of lust isn't necessarily there, and instead we see romance and vulnerability. However, those students who were looking at the Venus of Urbino were able to identify how there was more of a sexual power element to that image, with the subject staring directly into the audience, looking at the observer and lying seductively. So that is what we have covered in our seminars this semester. So I hope that helps you to identify ways in which you can explore your minor and major images and how to derive psychological interpretations from that, using the socio-historical context, the history of the artist, what the artist was trying to convey, the worth of the piece, and psychological interpretations and reception. And now these are my final tips for the module. Of course, my tips are relatively short. They are to do with what we have covered in seminar. For a more thorough overview of what to do for your assessment, make sure that you watch Craig's 30-minute overview of the module and how to complete your assessment. I watched this earlier to make sure that I wasn't doing just the same thing over again, and it gives you such a good run through of what's expected in your assignment. I know that the sort of temptation when you are completing a module is not to bother looking at the module summary because you've done it already, so why would you watch the summary, because you can just summarize it in your head. Absolutely don't do that this time. Make sure that you watch that summary lecture because it gives you step-by-step details of how to complete your assignment. But these are my final tips for you as well. So number 1 is don't be confused alone. Craig and I have got a number of live chat or forum sessions, and we're both happy to receive questions via email. If you're stuck and you're panicking, first make sure that you watch that summary lecture of Craig's, and then if you're still stuck and a bit confused, make sure that you contact one of us. Please don't get stressed and upset. There is a lot of support for you to use. The second is not to try and shoehorn psychological theory into your assignment. In some places, it will flow easily, but if you're sat scratching your head thinking about how you can apply some kind of psychological theory, it's probably a bit too contrived and it would be better to go without. Psychological interpretation does not always equal psychological theory. Whilst it would be great if there happened to be one that naturally applied, and if so, absolutely please do it, don't try and shoehorn psychological theory into your assignment. Do show passion and enthusiasm for your images. We want to see how this module has opened your eyes to how to assess art and how to understand art. Don't choose an image that you're not excited about. If you're not massively into classic art, then don't choose a piece of classic art. You can choose a photograph from a magazine cover from Cosmopolitan 2 months ago. It's totally up to you. As Craig says in his lecture, if it has been created, it is art according to this module. You must show passion and enthusiasm for the images that you select. So choosing an image just because you think we'll think it's a cool image won't necessarily get you the marks. Do use the materials that Craig and I have shared to help you to structure your essay. Read the marking criteria and the learning objectives. Make sure that you proofread. I can't believe that I've done this because Craig did the exact same thing in his summary lecture when he was talking about proofreading, and he noticed that he'd done a spelling error in his slides, and here I am talking to you about proofreading and doing exactly the same thing. So you can see on the second bullet point down, I've spelt probably as probably. So make sure that you proofread better than Craig and I do for our summary lectures. Swap essays with someone else, swap essays with another member of this module so that you can help each other, but also make sure that you share your essay with someone from another course. Make sure that they understand the essay as well, because writing for a lay audience in a scientific way is a really important skill. And finally, don't panic. As Craig says, we're not trying to catch you out. We want to see what you're excited about and the psychological interpretations that you derive from the images that you choose. We're really excited to see what you come up with, and panicking is not going to help you. Like we said, or like I've said in my first point, don't be confused alone, don't panic. There's plenty of support for you. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching this final summary session. I will be available during the seminar times until your assignment is due. via the live chat function on Moodle. So if you feel like you need some extra support, then please do get involved with those or send me an email directly. Good luck. It's been a joy teaching this module, and I'm really excited to see what you come up with. So that's all from me. Bye-bye.